This is a story about a relationship born in the shadows between two countries that pretty much the whole world had turned its back on. A bond that was built on military deals and even nuclear secrets, and has now completely imploded into a public accusation of the worst crime imaginable. How do you go from secret allies to courtroom enemies?
And that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? To really get how we ended up here, with South Africa dragging Israel before the world's highest court, we've got to go back. I mean, way back. Because this is a history so tangled up in mistrust and betrayal that what's happening today, well, it starts to feel almost inevitable. So, let's start at the very beginning, with what you could call the original sin of this relationship. This was a time when both Israel and apartheid South Africa were totally isolated on the world stage. And instead of keeping their distance, they decided to team up. In secret, of course.
And this is where the story gets really complicated, and frankly, incredibly hypocritical. You see, publicly, at places like the United Nations, Israel would cast its vote to condemn apartheid. But behind closed doors, a totally different reality was taking shape. They were busy building one of the apartheid regime's most important strategic partnerships. It was really a marriage of convenience between two pariah states. And this number tells you everything you need to know about the sheer scale of this partnership. Over about 2 decades, the secret military trade between them was worth an estimated $10 billion. Israel literally became apartheid South Africa's #1 arms dealer, helping the racist regime bust international sanctions and tighten its brutal grip on the country. So how did this all unfold? Well, look at the timeline. In 1975, they signed the secret ISSA Pact, which made it all official. Then, just a year later, in '76, Prime Minister Rabin rolled out the red carpet for John Vorster, a guy who was literally locked up during World War II for his pro-Nazi sympathies. By '77, they're actively working together to get around a mandatory UN arms embargo. But the darkest secret of them all, a suspected joint nuclear test in 1979. This wasn't just about selling guns. This was a deep collaboration, right up to the nuclear level. And you are not going to believe the justification for all of this. Shimon Peres, the guy who signed that 1975 deal, actually told his South African hosts that their alliance was built on a common hatred of injustice. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. The absolute mental gymnastics required to say that while you're arming a white supremacist regime, it's just staggering. That quote really hangs over this entire story. All right, so fast forward to 1994. Apartheid is finally over. You'd think, okay, clean slate, fresh start, right? Well, not exactly. The wounds from that era were incredibly deep, and they were about to be ripped wide open all over again by a whole new set of scandals. So, did things get better after democracy arrived? Did those wounds start to heal? The short answer is a hard no. In fact, a whole new kind of exploitation was about to surface, and it would poison any real chance of a fresh start. And that brings us to the Durban kidney transplant scandal. For a lot of South Africans, this whole affair just cemented a feeling that had started back during apartheid, a feeling of being exploited. I mean, just look at the breakdown here. Between 2001 and 2003, this massive international organ trafficking ring was running out of South Africa. You had wealthy Israeli recipients paying up to $120,000 for a new kidney. And the donors? Poor people from Brazil and Romania who were paid as little as $6,000. The whole thing was put together by Israeli brokers who were using South African hospitals like Netcare to do the operations. It was just a brutal story of the rich preying on the poor, and it left another deep scar on the relationship. So, in the middle of all of this bad blood, you have one figure who's trying to set a new moral compass for South Africa. And of course, that person is Nelson Mandela. His personal vision would go on to shape the country's entire foreign policy. And this quote, this one right here, it's everything. In 1997, Mandela said these words, and they became the bedrock of South Africa's foreign policy on this issue. He drew a direct line from our own fight against apartheid to the Palestinian cause. For him, and for the new South Africa, these were two sides of the same coin, two parallel struggles for freedom.
But here's the thing you have to understand about Mandela. He wasn't just an activist, he was a statesman. So while he called Yasser Arafat a comrade in arms and absolutely saw the struggles as linked, he didn't cut off diplomatic ties with Israel when he became president. He always affirmed Israel's right to exist safely and believed that talking was better than isolation. So the key takeaway is this. His solidarity was absolute, but his approach as a leader was very nuanced.
Okay, so that's the foundation Mandela laid. But since then, things have moved way beyond just solidarity. That simmering diplomatic tension has exploded into an all-out legal war, playing out on the biggest stage in the world. So how did South Africa actually argue its case at the International Court of Justice? Well, it basically broke down into 4 key steps. First up, they detailed what they alleged were genocidal acts happening in Gaza. Second, they pointed to public statements from Israeli leaders as proof of genocidal intent. And this is key. They didn't just talk about the current conflict, they framed it all within the context of what they called a 75-year-long apartheid. And finally, they asked the court to step in immediately and stop the military operations.
And just like that, the legal battle lines were drawn in the sand. You've got South Africa on one side accusing Israel of violating the Genocide Convention, and on the other side, Israel firing back, calling the charges a baseless blood libel, insisting it's a war of self-defense, and even accusing South Africa of being the legal arm of Hamas. It's a total public breakdown of relations.
Which brings us right up to the present day. Because none of this is just ancient history, right? It's the lens through which South Africa sees the world and its place in it, especially when new conflicts kick off. All right, let's play out a hypothetical scenario to see how this works in practice. Let's say it's February 28th, 2026. News breaks that the US and Israel have launched joint military strikes on Iran. You can bet South Africa's condemnation would be swift, and it would be absolute. Why? Because an action like that gets instantly filtered through our own history. A powerful Western nation and its main ally in the region, Israel, taking unilateral military action. In the South African mind, the parallels to the past would be impossible to ignore. And the official government response wouldn't just be political outrage. It would be legalistic. You'd likely hear President Ramaphosa's office put out a statement saying something just like this, that this kind of preemptive strike is not allowed under international law. It's not just a political jab. It's a continuation of the same strategy used at the ICJ, trying to position South Africa as a defender of international law against powerful states that seem to ignore it.
But what about the people? What's the feeling on the street or, on social media? Well, you would see posts and comments that look exactly like this. People would immediately connect the dots back to the Western alliance that supported the apartheid government. The feeling would be clear. For many South Africans, maybe the specific countries change, but the basic story of Western military power being used in ways they see as unjust, that story hasn't changed at all. It's a grievance that runs deep in our history. So at the end of the day, what this entire decades-long story boils down to is one massive question. That old secret alliance, that was pure realpolitik, a practical partnership between two outcasts. But South Africa's position today is framed as a moral one, born from its own fight for freedom. As the world changes and new alliances form, which one of those is going to win out? Are countries going to follow their moral compass or just their strategic interests? The complicated history between these two countries is a powerful case study for these big questions, and we're going to keep digging into these kinds of complex stories right here. For more deep dives into South African geopolitics and where we fit in this changing world, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching.